It's on the go. I want to say hi to everyone. I put up a video yesterday. Well, it was an audio recording I did in response to someone's comment on another channel, and the comment was we was having different viewpoints about whether Africans sold Africans into slavery, and I did a breakdown of that. What is meant by selling your own. What does that actually mean? And I went into a bit more detail that Africans, our ancestors, or my ancestors, did sell each other, but it wasn't the way that we see it today. Okay, I was talking about whether Africans sold Africans into slavery. I broke down a little bit about what it does mean to be an African, because African, it suggests that we're just one people. When you say, oh, African, it's just like a general term. It's like sometimes, far as I understand, when Americans sometimes they come to England, they might say they're going to Europe. You know, they just generalize it. Sometimes they are going to different parts of Europe too, but sometimes it's just a general term. I'm going to Europe, but it might be specifically they might be going to Germany or maybe going to France or something like that. But sometimes people just say Africa as just one place and one people. But the word Africa is it's coming from the external. It's external. It's someone looking from the outside and saying that continent is Africa. But years ago, the continent wasn't called it. There wasn't no name for the landmass because nobody knew the extent of it. Why would a tribe called landmass Africa when they didn't know the extent of where the land even ended? It's all this, people don't think about those things, you know. Anyway, let's get back to the topic. I was talking about slavery. I was talking about whether Africans sold Africans, and I said that Africans didn't actually sell their own as such, because most of the selling was during wars or after wars. There were prisoners that would normally be prisoners, and then those prisoners would normally be used as enslaved people within the society that won the war. Now, this is a common thing throughout history. People tend to battle with this in Africa, but it happens all over the world. I don't like to use the Bible as a reference, but just to sort of reflect, it gives us a lot of laws in the Old Testament that was, you know, I'm not going to say what I believe and what I don't believe, but the people that believe in the Bible, they believe that these laws is given by their God, and these laws, they had a lot of laws concerning slavery, just like the Quran's got laws concerning slavery. And so you've got these laws where the people that was chosen people, the Hebrews, they had certain laws pertaining to how to treat a slave, but then the slaves that were from the enemy had a different set of laws. But there was also slaves from within the Hebrew people. There were slaves within there were the Hebrew people had their own slaves, and the laws for those was less harsh. Now, this is the same thing happening in Africa, and that's why some people say that some of the Hebrew practices are in Africa. I won't go into that, but the Africans acted very similar to what you see in the Old Testament in terms of slavery. And so you see that pattern all over. Now, somebody was saying making some comments, and was saying that Africans only sold their prisoners. There wasn't slaves. Now, I only speak from what I found out. I can only speak from what I know. I can only speak from what people that's told me. They're either eyewitnesses to it, or they're reading from secondary source, or they heard it from a secondary source. But we have enough evidence, bags of evidence, to say that Africans had slaves within their own societies before Europeans and before Arabs came there. This is not something I even need to dispute, because it's so clear in my head about it. It's something that I've been on for about 40 years studying black history. And the slavery part of it, for some reason, the last, how many years now, 3 or 4 years, I've just been interested in it more and more because I wanted to know what was happening in Africa. I just had this yearning about wanted to know what was happening in Africa, because we always want to blame just the Europeans, just the white man, blame the white man for everything. He's blamed for everything. It's almost like black people don't have no power. Or we're telling ourselves we don't have no power. We had no say in it. We just was there passively, was being taken out of our continent for 400 years. And that is the issue that I had. And I knew that there's more to it than that. The funny thing is, my father told me many years ago that Africans sold us. And even they said us, them and us. I don't see it as them and us as my dad was saying it, because it's my ancestors. My ancestors sold my ancestors. Some of my ancestors were slave traders, and some of them were victims. That's the way I see it. And I don't have no gripes with present day Africans. I don't have no gripes. I'm not going to say, oh, you guys sold us into slavery. That's so foolish. Or you guys sold the Jamaicans into slavery. You guys sold the African Americans into slavery. No, they didn't sell African Americans, because African Americans became African Americans. There were Africans that became so-called African Americans. When they left the continent, there wasn't African Americans, there wasn't Jamaicans, there wasn't from St. Vincent, where my parents is from. They were just African people from different tribes, different kingdoms, just happened to be caught up in wars and friction. Some of them caught up in slave raiding, some of them caught up in kidnappings, some of them were criminals, some of them was prisoners of war that was sold off. Some stayed and some were sold off. There's so many reasons what I've gone through already in the last video, which was an audio message, and I did reel off some of the reasons you could be enslaved. There's many reasons, at least 10 reasons where you could be enslaved. The ways you could be enslaved. And let us not focus to think that, oh, this man here, Leonard, my name's Leonard, oh, by the way, this person here is trying to make black people look bad. Because I'm only telling the truth. Some people want to make out that we didn't do nothing wrong. But the thing is, all what we did, other people was doing. Before I go into talking about what happened in Africa, and I want to read some stuff from this book here, eyewitness accounts of what was happening in Africa in the 1700s. Eyewitness accounts of what was happening in Africa in the 1700s. Before I go into that, I want to just say something about Europe. I'm just a small man. I'm going to do a video on Europe. This stuff what we're talking about here is never ending. Don't expect to get everything in this video. People will write comments and will add stuff, and they will say things, and they will almost think that I don't know certain stuff. But I'm not going to be covering everything about slavery in one video. I'm not going to be covering everything about what happened in one video. So make your comments is good and discuss certain things, but realize that I do have extensive knowledge on this and I want to share it, but I want to share it bit by bit, and as people do make comments, it prompts me to say other things. So anyway, I'll get back to Europe. So we know around about 400 and something AD. Before I say that, what I wanted to say is that most people know St. Patrick. If you're American, listen to this, or if you're British, obviously you would know St. Patrick. And we know St. Patrick's to do with the Irish. So St. Patrick is the patron saint of Ireland. He's the one that's responsible for spreading the gospel to the Irish. I know there probably was more people spreading the gospel, but human beings, we like to have simple stories. St. Patrick, he evangelized Ireland as if he did it by himself, but that's how the story goes. But not many people know that St. Patrick was actually a slave before he was a church leader. I can't remember his exact position. He was a leader in the church, in the Catholic Church. He was actually a saint. St. Patrick was actually the English, and he was enslaved by the Irish when he was a boy. They actually raided England like they used to, and captured him and took him into slavery into Ireland. But he escaped from slavery at a certain age, went back to England, and then from at that point, I don't know the full story, but he got involved in the church as he got older, and before you knew it, he was up there high, and he vowed, I think he had a vision or something, to go back to Ireland to evangelize it. So St. Patrick was a slave. So slavery at that point was in England. This would have been just after the Roman Empire's fallen, or around about the same time, roughly, approximately. I'm not giving the exact precise time, but we know slavery was in England. Slavery was in Bristol. Bristol was a port area for and parts of Ireland where the Vikings used to have slave ports and other Europeans. So they used to take slaves around Europe, different parts of Europe, and so what we would say then is that Europeans, what we now class as Europeans. Before those days, there's no such thing as European, and that's what another thing we need to understand, is that we have this simple language, simple kind of understanding of the past, but we don't realize the past is not what we think it was. Irish, English, different parts of England were warring against each other. There's parts of England called Cornwall, there's Middlesex, Essex. All of these were like East Saxon, Middle Saxon, because you have the Saxon tribes, you have the Angles, and all of this. These people were all separate people. So if you imagine, Africa was more like that when the English came and when the other European came to Africa, or at least I know England's a country and it's a small place, but if you was to get one part of Africa the size of England, it'd be divided up in many parts, just like England was many years ago. It's just that the European nations, at the time they came to Africa, they were more in bigger blocks. I'm just making it simple, bigger blocks. They were kind of more together, but they were still divided more than they are now. You understand? So the Vikings did a lot of enslaving across Europe. They even sold Europeans to Arabs and things like that. So you could say then, you can look at Europeans just as we look at Africans now. Africans did sell each other because it's a thing that, for some reason, human beings do. They do. The Arabs was doing it for many centuries, all over the place, in Africa, in Europe, everywhere. China has a long history of slavery amongst Chinese people. I remember one guy at my workplace was saying to me, because I was talking about slavery, black slavery. I don't know what he was talking about. And he was saying, "Oh, we had loads of slaves." I think he was trying to say, "Look, stop talking about black slavery. We had millions of slaves in China, and probably still stuff going on now. I don't even know for sure." So black people, I'm trying to say to you guys, don't feel bad that we used to enslave each other. Why are you feeling bad about that? It's just what used to happen. All we need to do is learn from history. Everybody needs to learn from history. Europeans need to learn from their history. They need to learn from what they did within Africa, what they did, and where they took Africans to America. Everyone needs to learn from history. Africans need to learn from what they did, the different African nations that sold people. But the thing is, you can't ever blame a whole nation. It's people within a nation. Sometimes it's the king, sometimes it's the noblemen, sometimes it's powerful people within those nations that was doing slave trade. You had actual merchants in Africa selling slaves. I can say all this stuff, and I can't back it up straight away, all of it. I can say all this stuff because it's what I've gone into and researched. Slavery was when the Europeans came, and when the Arabs we know Arabs was doing it too. Thing is, when sometimes a person wants to do a topic on slavery, you're always going to get someone say, "Well, what about what the Arabs did?" Because everyone's trying to avoid blame. Everybody thinks when somebody opens their mouth, they're blaming. When I open my mouth, about slavery, I'm not blaming nobody. I'm not blaming Europeans. I'm not blaming Africans. I'm just giving people the history. We don't need to be sad. We don't need to be angry about what our ancestors did, because they're dead and gone. It's what we need to be thinking about, what we're going to do, how we're going to live as a people, black and white, Chinese, Asians, how are we going to live? That's what we need to be thinking about. Because the thing is, what we don't understand is the earth itself, it works together. What we do in China, or what you're doing in China, what you're doing in Africa, what you're doing in Europe, it affects the atmosphere. Whether it's the weather, the pollution, and all of the different things, without going into the details of it, all of those things, what it's trying to say to us is that we have one home. Every human being is living on one home, but we spend a lot of time with this black and white issue. We spend a lot of time. Asians got their issues, what they have. Even within India, you got issues. Different Indians don't like this Indian. You're this caste. You're low caste. You're this, you're high caste, and all of these different things that we have. We spend so much time on all that stuff, but yet we don't realize that if this earth is ready to go down, we all go down with it. You know what I mean? So it's better off that we start working together now and stop all this stuff about, black and white and all this. Yes, we can study the history. We can study the history about slavery, but we don't want to study and then go and then go in and start blaming people. Because it's not about blame. It's not about blame. We can go into it to understand it. But it's not about blame. It's about learning from it. Anyway, that's my rant. This book here, I want to read a couple of things from this book, because this guy, Equiano, he was actually born in a place called Osaka. Now that place might not be on the map now. I don't know whether some Africans who read this book from that region actually believe this book, because they think maybe it was the white guys that made him write it. There's people that believe that this book's like fabricated, even though Equiano said he wrote it himself. Because we might think to yourself, well, how can he write a book? He's African and he was enslaved. How could he write a book? Well, he got his freedom here in England, in a place called Blackheath. Now, Blackheath, where I'm sitting here right now, in England, right here now in England, Blackheath, I can get in my car and I can be in Blackheath in about 15 minutes. That's how close Blackheath is. Where I live here in England is the heart of slave stories, of all kinds of stories. Not all of them negative. Stories of black people that was here in the 1700s, and even black people that was here before slavery. So I live close to a lot of history here in England. And Equiano was living just up the road. This brother here was living just up the road from me. And this book he wrote in 1790, I think it was approximately. When he was in his 40s, he wrote this book. And the reason why he wrote the book, he was asked to write it, he's pushed to write it by a lot of English people that he knew, because he started to mix in high circles. The people that subscribe to this book, I'm not going to read it off, but in the front of the book here, in the front, the people that subscribed to the book before the book came out, and nowadays we talk about people subscribe to YouTube channel. Well, before, back in the day, people would subscribe to a book before the book came out. And the list of names in here, there's royalty described to this book. Noble people of the English nobility subscribe to this book. There's hundreds of names of people that subscribed to the book before he wrote it. People encouraged him to write it because he was mixing in circles. This is after he got his freedom. He bought his own freedom. People must wonder, how did that happen? Because we have this narrative of slavery. We only have one narrative of slavery, of pain and suffering. Yes, pain and suffering. Nobody wants to be a slave, But we need to understand that every single slave had a different life. Every slave or every person that was enslaved had a different life, depending on where they was, depending on what decade it was, what time it was, depending on who was their master. There's all different reasonings, but what it is with most human beings and most of us, we don't have enough time to look at details. We rather look at or just listen to a narrative that suits what we want to believe. But in reality, there's a lot of things we need to know. Anyway, Equiano, as I said, he came here and he got his freedom when he was in his 40s. He was captured in a part of Nigeria, what we call Nigeria now. He was part of the Igbo people. Igbo people are southeast Nigeria. And he talks about in this book, he talks about how he was captured, and he talks about his life before he was captured. So he was about 10 when he got captured. And in his book, he describes how he got captured. But I want to read something about what he says about his life in that area. He mentions that Benin was the kingdom that was ruling in that region. But so Benin had a lot of districts. He said Benin was the main kingdom, and his area that he lived in wasn't really under the control of Benin, but it was more like in a nominal way. That's how he put it. So there was some kind of respect to Benin, but there wasn't actually submissive to Benin, if you get what I'm saying. But Benin, for some of us that don't know anything about Benin, Benin was a great city in what we now know as Nigeria. It was very well organized. Put it this way, when we grew up in school, when I was growing up in school here in England, and I was just going through life and whatever, only images that we had of Africa was Tarzan. Tarzan was the one ruling in Africa at the time, and so in the fiction story of Tarzan, but we had documentaries and stuff like that, but we never had an image of African having cities. And it's only like, I wouldn't say the last, there has always been people, historians that knew about these places like Benin and the Empire of Mali and Songhai and Empire of Ghana and all these great places in Africa. But as growing up as kids, we didn't know that. So Olada mentions Benin because the elders of his village, I don't know whether to call it a village or the district that he was in, they paid a certain amount of respect to Benin, but it wasn't under some great submission. Anyway, he got captured when he was 10 or 11, but he mentions a little bit about his village. He even mentions Zach partly. At least let's read about what he says about where he's from. He says, he says, that part of Africa known by the name of Guinea. So Guinea was like the region that we now know as like Nigeria, Ghana, Ivory Coast. All those countries along that region was known as Guinea. He says Guinea, but I don't think Equiano is saying that the Africans named it Guinea. That was a name that the Portuguese gave it, and maybe that name was an English translation to what the Portuguese would have called that region. And so that took on that a good portion of West Africa, Guinea. So he says he comes from Guinea, and he says that to which the trade of slaves is carried on. So he mentions that trade of slaves is carried on. Remember, he's writing this book, and he's about 40 odd years old writing this book now. And so this book is actually, he's obviously gained knowledge while he's in England also, but he's also reflecting back as a 10-year-old living in the region. But I think he mentions about it's 3,000 miles. So he says the slave trade, he says, is carried on, which is 3,400 miles from Senegal to Angola. And we know that's the knowledge that we all know now, that from Senegal to Angola is where the slave trade was carried on, which is about 3,000 miles. This is almost in every textbook now. When people think about slavery, they're thinking about some small scale thing. Oh, the Europeans came and just take people from the coastline. No, this is 3,000 miles of different forts and kingdoms working with the Europeans. You know what I mean? It's like there was actually trading with the Europeans. Stop thinking that Africans are so weak that they allowed Europeans to come and take slaves from their interior for 400 years. Are you crazy? People are actually, there's educated people, professors, people that want to give you that story. I don't know where they're getting that from. Anyway, so he talks about where, he talks about basically where he's the region where he comes from, Guinea. But then he says of these, he talks about the kingdoms now. He said there's a variety of kingdoms. He's talking about along the coastline, yeah. Both as to the extent of these, the most considerable is the kingdom of Benin, which we now know is part of Nigeria now. Both as to the extent and to the wealth. See, this guy is telling us what was going on in Africa. We don't have to be listening to people making up lies. This guy was living in Africa. He's telling us the place was wealth and the richness and culture of the soil. The soil. He talks about the soil. He says the power of its king. And the king was recognized as a powerful king because the Portuguese said that. The Dutch said that in the 1600s. The Portuguese said that in the 1400s. The Portuguese had to deal with the kings of Benin. It was one king of Benin that kicked the Portuguese out of Benin. People think, oh, Africans, they couldn't do nothing. They just put their hands up and the Europeans came and just take them and put them on a boat. This is some simplistic story. The king of Benin was actually trading with the Portuguese until the Portuguese double-crossed them. When the Portuguese double-crossed them, what do you think the king of Benin did? He kicked the Portuguese out. That was late 1400s. This is all documented. The Portuguese have documented that too. That's the thing is, the Portuguese document those things because they document when they got kicked out of places. And so we need to stop this foolish thing about Africans being so weak that people came and took them. That is so stupid. Look how strong Africans are. Look how strong black people are. How can someone come and take you? You know? I have to laugh, man. So, he talks about Benin. He says Benin, the king, the powerful king, and he says, and the number and warlike disposition of his inhabitants. And the number and the warlike disposition of his inhabitants. What are we talking about? Africans being weak? I don't know what we're talking about. The warlike disposition of the inhabitants. The Portuguese reported on that, and I think the Dutch definitely reported on the fact that the Kingdom of Benin had a standing army, which even a lot of Europeans at that time didn't have standing armies. Because that's a level of development. You got a standing army ready to go to war at any time. That's a level of development. He says that his father, my father, I'm jumping there, my father was one of these elders or chiefs to whom I've spoken. He mentioned about elders before in the book. He says his father was an elder or like a chief because that's what he was in a district. So there were elders and these guys would judge the laws. They would set the penalties for crime. So this Benin and the districts outside of Benin was organized. We have this vision of Africa just like this disorganized jungle, people just running around, climbing up trees and all. That's the image that I grew up with of Africa. But obviously many years I've known it's not been like that. For many years, about 40 years I've been studying, and I know Africa is far from being like that. So that was the image that was kind of given, not even directly, just indirectly. Indirectly you would have those images. And so he talks about his father being a distinction, and his father and those men would have a mark on their forehead. It was done by cutting the skin there and folding it over. And it was just like, when you saw a man like that, you knew that was an elder. You knew that was... Africans have ways of marking and creating... People can know whose status or know who's who in the village or in the district. So anyway, he goes on. He goes on and says that these men would judge people. And he says that he remembers... He says, I remember a man who was brought before my father. Before his father, you know. Man, his father's an important guy. And the other judges, remember. So this Equiano, he's talking about a place that is organized, that's got judges, that's got elders and chiefs, that's got order. That's not the image that we've been brought up with of Africa, you know. So he says that the man, he says, I remember a man was brought before my father and the other judges for kidnapping a boy. See? Kidnapping was going on. But kidnapping was against the law in that part of Africa, and probably all parts of West Africa. Kidnapping was against the law. Yeah? So he was brought before the judge for kidnapping, and although he was the son of a chief, so this guy that was doing that, he was son of a chief. Although he was son of a chief, he was condemned to make recompense by a man or woman slave. I'm not 100% sure what that actually means, whether he had to, I don't know whether he had to give one of his men and women slaves to repay, recompense to repay by a man or a woman slave. Because he was son of a chief, maybe he had a light punishment. He had to give a man or woman slave. However, he says adultery now. He says adultery, however, was sometimes punished by slavery or death. Now, I've got people commenting on my last video saying that not realizing that Africans had punishments for crimes, and one of them was slavery. Slavery or death. What would you prefer? A punishment which I believe is inflicted on it throughout most of the nations of Africa. See, this guy is giving us inside knowledge about Africa. He says this punishment of adultery is inflicted, he believes, in most of the nations of Africa. Because Africa frowned on adultery, just like other nations did. And punishment by slavery or death. So we know slavery was in Africa. That's what that one instance there. I know this is only one book, and I'm dealing with one part of the book there. But we have other accounts like this in other sources. Other accounts by other enslaved people that wrote accounts in America and in England. But not only that, we have oral traditions that came up from people that's living in Africa now. You know the UNESCO in 2003, I think it was, they did a whole series of oral traditions in Nigeria, Benin, and Ghana. They went in with researchers to talk to people to get a collective oral tradition. It's no good you having your one oral tradition like, oh, my grandfather told me this. That's good, you know, but when you got a collective oral tradition by loads of people, you can see a story, you can see a pattern. And slavery came up in those collective. Slavery in Africa came up in those collective oral traditions. I've got those traditions. I will share them. Slavery came up in it. Even the transportation of slaves from the interior into the coast, those traditions still exist, because in certain parts of Africa, certain parts of Nigeria, you still got the trails, and people that know about those things can say, look, this is where they used to walk to go towards the coast. They would say, this is where they used to have a market and they used to sell slaves there before they even got to the coast. Another thing, look, I'm going to just give you a little bit of this book, but this book is really good. He talks about, he says, we are almost a nation of dancers, musicians, and poets. He says, we are almost a nation of dancers. They say that most people are dancers, musicians, and poets. Look at that, poets, you know. Every great event, such as a triumph, return from battle. When you read this book, when I read this book when I was, I read this book in my 20s. I didn't read all of it, but a lot of the things that I'm picking up now, I didn't pick up before because I just skimmed through it. And a lot of people read books and they don't actually stop to think what they're reading. He's talking about when they return from battle. Some people would like to tell you that Africans didn't even fight each other. I just said, oh, this glorious Africa. We were kings, we were queens, and everything was nice. You know, people want to believe they were kings and queens. It was everybody a king and a queen. The kings and the queens that were the ones that caused a lot of the problems in the first place. Why do you want to be? Why do you want to be a descendant from a king or a queen? Because most king or queens in all over the world, they're not good people. Some of them are great people, do great things for their people. In Africa, you had people like that, and in Europe, you had some great kings and queens in Europe, and in Asia, you probably had great kings. But there are a lot of them. They just do it. Obviously, they inherit it and they do it for their own glory. And the average person is probably not even getting bread to eat. So let's not always focus on the kings and the queens. You know, let's focus on ordinary people for a change. I mean, this guy, he talks about cooking, how they cooked meat, the vegetables they ate, and he talks about he's really enjoying his life as a young boy. He talks about his mother. I'm not going to go into all that, but I wanted to show you some stuff relating to the topic of slavery. But we know that I mentioned a little bit about Benin, about how Benin was, and so I don't want people to have the impression that I'm only talking about slavery, because some people think that's the only thing that is our only history, but it's not our history. Obviously, this guy here, Equiano, is talking about in the 1700s. He's talking about the height of slavery was going on. It's the height of slavery at that period. So he lived and born in that period where, you know, it was a heightened fear amongst each other. Not from the European. The European didn't come this far up to where this guy was living, you know. Anyway, he talks about the buildings. Something I want to share on this. It says in our buildings we study convenience rather than ornament. So he's relating now, he's in England now when he's writing this book. So he's in his 40s. He's lived in England for a while now, and he knows that England is got in their buildings, they have art. They put pictures up, you know, because he lived in many different places. So he observed the way Europeans was. But he says that in their houses, it was more about convenience rather than ornament. In other words, we didn't just have stuff for show. We had stuff for convenience. When I say we, I'm just saying, I say we because obviously this is just a part of Africa. We know everywhere, different parts of Africa you go to, it would vary, whether it's slightly or very totally opposite. You know, so I'm just giving you like an insight. So in our buildings, we study convenience rather than ornament. Each master of a family has a large square piece of ground. So everyone's got their ground. Everyone's got in Jamaica they call it their yard. You know, everyone's got their ground, you know, and surrounded with a moat or a fence. So imagine, he's using these words because he's living in England, so he would know a moat is what you surround your castle with. You know, you dig it out and you have water there. It's there to protect you from the enemy. So you can imagine what he's talking about is quite large pieces of land for each person to have. You know what I'm saying? They got the moat, and he says that, or a fence. So they'll have a moat or a fence, or enclosed with a wall made with red earth tempered. So they'd have the wall that is made with red earth going round, just the sort of, you know, privacy, because you've got the other people over there. You got just like people have their houses now, they've got their fencing, but this is like one person. He's got a moat or a fence or a wall. So if you visualize what this Africa that is this place is describing, to visualize it. On the other chapter I'm jumping about, he talks about what clothes used to wear. They used to wear muslin cloth and wrapped around. So there's this images of Africans always being half naked. And I'm not saying anything's even wrong with that, but people associate less clothes with being primitive or being less educated or being less knowledgeable about life. But in the end of the day, you know, it's what's inside. You know, if a person wants to be half clothed, depending on where they are, that doesn't make them less intelligent than you. Obviously you would know things that they didn't know, but it depends. Everyone lives according to their environment. You know what I'm saying? Your environment, you learn what's in your environment. Anyway, he says that he talks about the wall is made of is made dry, and then it says it has, so it's hard as bricks, as they say. So it's made dry till it's hard as brick. Obviously, he's using the word brick because he's in England now, so he understands the difference. Within this are his houses. So within the wall are his houses to accommodate his family and slaves. You hear what I'm saying? You hear what I'm saying? People, stop telling me the Africans didn't have slaves. This guy was 10 years old when he was captured. He remembers his life. He wasn't that young that he forgot. He remembered his life. So within the wall is accommodated his family and slaves, which if is numerous, frequently so if it's numerous, frequently cause these tenements to present the appearance of a village. You hear what I'm talking about here? One man could have a family so big that Equiano is comparing it to a village. So could you imagine how big his district was that he came from? This is one person. If he had enough wives and enough slaves, you got to have accommodation for all of them. And let's stop here. Let's stop and pause. Let's stop and pause there. Some people, they want to say this book is fabricated. I think the reason why some of them want to say that is because the fact that he talks about these things so openly. He talks about his family, even his own family had slaves, and he became enslaved and sold to the Europeans. But he wasn't sold to the Europeans straight away. The book would tell you that he was sold about 3 times within what we call Nigeria now, before he was entered the coast, before he reached the coastline. He only mentions he saw a white man for the first time when he got on the ship. Definitely, when he got to the coast, he saw white men. So who captured him? If he only saw white men when he got to the coast, who captured him? He said it was people that captured him spoke his own language. So they wasn't from his district, but they spoke his own language. That means they had the same tribe, or at least they had some kind of connection, because at least in that region they spoke the same language. And we know in Nigeria, hundreds of languages. I think there's over 200 languages in Nigeria. So for him to be caught by people that spoke his language shows that they had a similar root of ancestry, and they had probably had some common practices, but just that they wasn't from his district. They came in. It was 2 men and a woman. It's in the book. 2 men and a woman climbed over the fence. They said into the district or to the village, or whatever you want to call it, the compound of where his family was, and they took him and his sister. He talks about it. So he says that they have slaves, and the families could have slaves, and it could be numerous. It says in the middle stands the principal building. So in the middle stands the principal building, appropriated to the sole use of the master. You see the master, the man, he had his own house. He had his own house. His wives, I was trying to read that. I'm jumping ahead. His wives. Let's have a look. So he had his own So he had his master. It said the principal building, and it consisted of 2 apartments. So it's basically a 2-room apartment, in one of which he sits in the day with his family, and the other the other is left apart for the reception of his friends. So he had a bit for his family. One side, his family was sitting, talk to his family, and then the other side was for his friends. There's just too much. There's too much. I got to end it here. I want to talk about a bit about his wife. I know this already, but I know that the wives would have their own apartments, their own place of dwelling within the actual walled area. And so this is just a little piece of this book. And all I wanted to show you there was that within this part of Africa, in the Igbo region of Africa, they had slaves. It's nothing to be ashamed about. It's nothing to get emotional about. It's just the way life was. That's the way how society was built. Now, I'm going to qualify what I just said. I'm going to, in case people was thinking that these slaves were same as what was in America, I want to just say something about that. And I know there's many people right now listening to me, and they got their ideas, and there's one set of people who will say, look, see, African had slaves. Look, you see, I told you African had slaves. And then there's the other side. He's trying to say to me, okay, they had slaves, but it wasn't the same as what was in America. It wasn't the same. Why was they different? Because even though slavery in Africa is very complex, there is volumes of books of slavery in Africa. You know, people have done so much research on that, sat down and listened to oral traditions and put it in books. There's a lot of things, a lot of complexity to slavery in Africa. But you can't put slavery, you can compare slavery like in Europe and in Africa and in whatever, in Americas. You can make comparisons, but there's differences to all of them. There's differences. Most of the slaves in Africa were just, it was more like position. Slavery became like UK, like a slave class. It wasn't a thing where they didn't see you as a human being, or he was just a commodity. He was owned by someone, but he was still a human being. He was still a human being, and that's a key thing. In Americas and in South America, North America, wherever, they came to a point in history where Africans became more and more of like being a commodity. They lost more and more rights. They had no rights. They couldn't marry for some parts of, like in the British colonies in the Caribbean, you couldn't get married because you was property. You was just like a, what do you call it? A thing. And so you couldn't enter into a contract of marriage. That's why they used to have these African marriages, they used to call them, things that they used to do. So there was this dehumanization in Europe, and that came about because Europeans, being Christians, had to justify slavery. And the way you can justify slavery is to make the person that you're enslaved, you had to sort of come up with ideas of like they couldn't really have a soul, or they couldn't really be fully human. Because if they was fully human, then they would come under God's plan of like all men are created equal. That all men, we all come from, all men created from one blood. Some scripture in the book of Acts, if you know the Bible. So if a Christian, and the Europeans were Christians, whether it's nominal or whether they were practicing, they had this conscience, didn't they? And as slavery went on, and as some Christians, European Christians, were opposed to slavery, then those that was having slaves had to come up with more and more ideas to say, no, we need to make these people slaves because they're not fully human. They can't even manage themselves. And they haven't really got a soul. It doesn't really matter. I'm not saying everyone believed that. Some of them did. There was theories written down about that. Yeah, so generally, that's what I was talking about there, giving you some insight from the book, Equiano's book. I hope you guys go out and buy that book and read that book. I will do more on this book, and there's other books I've got. But this one, I love this book. This guy is like one of the guys I look up to, even though he's gone, he's passed, but his life was exceptional. He's achieved more than a lot of people, a lot of black people. He's achieved much more than a lot of black people in modern times. And we're supposed to have our freedom. But this guy, in the middle of slavery, wrote a book. How many of you have written a book? I haven't written one. My brother's written a book. I haven't written a book. How many of you has written a book? What's holding you back from writing a book? What's holding me back from writing a book? He wrote a book in the middle of slavery. When I haven't even spoke how he learned to read. It was English women in Blackheath up the road, as I told you. They taught him how to read and write. And he said to his master, you know something, I'm going to ask you a question. If I could pay for my freedom, would you allow me to go? and his master was a Quaker. And remember, Quakers, like even though if you know the history of slavery, Quakers was one of the biggest denominations of Christianity that was opposed to slavery. But there were Quakers that had slaves. We have to learn from this history in different ways. But the main thing is that we don't go around blaming anybody, because those people that did it, they're gone. They're gone. They've done what they did. They're gone, and we are the ones left now to live a life that was better than what they done. History on the Go. Please subscribe to this video, this channel, if you like what I'm talking about. Even if you don't like it, subscribe, because I will sure prompt you to think about things. You know, it's all about sharing, conversating, just starting a conversation. Thank you.